Pete, I have a question for you, hypothetical.
Okay.
I've have you ever been in a session and everything's going well? You have a nice stack, you're kind of cruising along, you're maybe playing your A game or something close to your A game, and then all of a sudden you make what you understand in real time during the session to be a blunder, to be an enormous mistake. Maybe it's such a big mistake that you stack off all of your profit for the day's session. And that one mistake haunts you for a long time. And it haunts you to such a degree that you're thinking about it 3, 4 days later when you're playing, your next session. And this mistake is way behind you. It still leaves you. And it becomes such a problem that you feel almost traumatized by it.
That escalated quite quickly. Like that
Sorry.
got quite dark and serious. But yes, like I've definitely
When I say traumatized, I mean like traumatized in the poker sense, is like as like you can't like it enters your thought process in a way that affects how you play in the future.
yeah,
I don't mean like traumatized in the sense of like,
night
you
terrors.
grew up with abusive parents or
I
something.
grew up with abusive blunders haunting my win rate. I wake up in cold sweats. I do actually wake up and run out of bed sometimes and just charge towards the bedroom door. My heart's doing like 210 a minute. It's kind of
Yeah,
scary. I get that quite a lot, but I don't think that's poker related. But the answer to your
probably
question
not.
is yes, I absolutely am one of the world's worst self persecutors. I'm extremely unforgiving. I'm extremely ruthless and authoritarian and punitive to myself when I make errors, especially when those errors result in bad consequences. I think growing up, I had quite a lenient dad who let me away with everything. And I didn't really have, he was lovely, but he wasn't the best at like disciplining or anything like that or confrontation. So I think I grew up with a lack of that. And because of that, I have like an inner child that refuses to do what it's told, that kind of does what it wants all the time. And sometimes in poker, I do things that I know are wrong. Like I know I shouldn't do them, but I give in to
Mm,
my desire in the moment. I think every poker player goes through this. We've called this type two
mm-hmm,
thinking, where we're
mm-hmm,
coerced and influenced by states of emotional affairs that we want to create effectively or avoid. And I definitely get stationary. I definitely do things that are
mm-hmm,
spewy. It's usually in the direction of investment rather than the direction of restraint. And I think that's just part and
mm-hmm,
parcel of like my inner child is just a bit too off the leash, so to speak. And then I kind of had to forge my own punitive parent in order to like police that child throughout my life. But that parent is like fucking horrific. Like if he actually gets going, he's just like a total dick. He's just like, you're useless. Of course you did that. You're terrible. Like what an embarrassment. It's like that basically. It was like
mm-hmm.
that at the driving range today. I went to practice some golf, and that guy came out. He was beating the shit out of me even this afternoon. Um, but yeah, I've recovered a bit now. So I think we all have versions of that punitive parent. We all
Mm-hmm.
have versions of that, like not wanting to let ourselves off the hook. We are inevitably going to blunder. Even when we get good, we're still going to blunder sometimes. We're going to blunder as a strong, experienced player and as a poker coach or something a lot less than we will as like a 1-3 live aspiring player or a 10NL online aspiring player or someone who's been stuck at 25NL for a few years. We're going to blunder less than that, but we're still going to blunder. And we're always going to blunder. We're always going to make mistakes all the way through our lifetime. And the better the relationship we have with our own mistakes, the better we're going to become as poker players, the stronger our mental game is
Mm.
going to be. But I have to admit, this is a chink in my armor. This is a soft spot. I definitely really, really struggle with what I deem in the moment to be unexcusably big mistakes, especially if they lead to a large loss of money in that one hand. And yes, they can haunt me for days. I can definitely think about a poker mistake 3 days later and still be a little bit ticked off about it. Yeah, I don't have the healthiest relationship with mistakes always, even though I'm quite good at getting my students to have a healthier relationship with mistakes. I
Mhm.
struggle with it myself, and this is the
Mhm.
eternal dilemma that I think we all have. It's easier to see it from the outside and help someone else sometimes than it is to fix it
Sure.
in yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I have a lot of the same issues. Um, I'm probably not as hard on myself as you are. I'm more impatient. So I feel like I should be playing at, I have this like version in my head of like the perfect version of myself playing poker, and that if I don't achieve that, or if I fall far from that, then, or I do something that kind of pulls me away, pulls me in the opposite direction away from that kind of ideal, um, it's really tough. It's like, like walking up a mountain and you make all this progress, and then all of a sudden, there's a landslide or something, or not a landslide because it's something that's your fault. Maybe you forget something down at the bottom and you have to go down again. Now you have to make up all of that progress. This is just like your way of thinking, and kind of being hard on yourself is in many ways counterproductive. And that. I know that the way I think is counterproductive, but I've always been inherently impatient when it comes to achieving any kind of goal. I never had a problem like embracing the grind of anything, but I have a problem if I feel like I've done all this work and I've made all this progress, and now I've taken 2 steps forward and 3 steps back kind of thing.
Mm.
And really poker is like constantly poking um at this kind of like part of my psyche, because it forces you to reset constantly, and it forces you to adjust your expectations constantly. And in your head, especially, I had like a really good month in July, and I definitely am on a bit of an upswing, and there's this sense that you have, even if it's false and it's not true, but you still feel like this is going to last forever. And this is just how poker is. And like, if I just do everything right, like I'll continue to win, and I'll just like watch my graph just like slowly just advance up, just like you would if you were training for, a marathon, or a long bike ride or something. You're like, I've done this progress and now I can do this many miles. Now I can do, and poker is not linear like that. And it doesn't allow that to happen. And so when you have those mistakes that set you back, they feel almost worse than if you're running bad or something. Like, because I ran bad in the beginning of the year, I still remember this. It's pretty fresh in my mind. The downswing I was on, I remember thinking like, oh, I lost again. That's normal. Just like, just like another losing session. At least it wasn't like 3 buy-ins. It was only like 1 buy-in. And then like it can easily switch to the opposite.
Right.
So my point is that I think for me, the difficulty of dealing with mistakes is a matter of, I feel like I've had to accomplish what I have to accomplish the same thing again, which is absolutely false, because I haven't, because I've experienced growth, even though that growth isn't reflected in the actual gain from the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of layers to this. Like, we can go 3 steps forward, 8 steps back, 12 steps forward, 7 steps back. And when you're in the 7 steps back phase of that, results wise, it just all feels backwards. It's incredibly hard to zoom out and see the bird's eye view, to see the bigger picture. So that thought of how normal that I'm losing, of course I can't win. It's not in the cards for me to win. It's just impossible. It's not in the stars. That feeling is the brain's way of saying, usually when there are patterns of consequences that are uniform like that, where it's all the same, there's something wrong. There's something going wrong. There's something permanent that's a cause of that, right? So if you just think about your life in general, if you wake up every day and you have like a really bad pain in your leg every day, all day for a week, you attribute that to a problem in your leg, and you go to the doctor and you get an x-ray and you try and figure out what's wrong with your leg, and you try and get it treated. If right now you get a really sharp twinge in your leg just once, you probably don't phone the doctor. You probably don't do anything. You just go, ow, you wait for it to go away, it's gone, and then you're like, that's probably nothing. So the brain is okay with like 1 or 2 instances of adversity, because those can be accidental. I touched that burning thing. That was silly of me. I tripped over that tree root walking through the forest. I got like a random cramp in my hand or something like that due to the way I was sleeping. Okay. But when it's constant adversity, the brain searches for a cause. It searches for an underlying thing that it can treat. And so it should, right? Because we want to get rid of these permanent causes of anguish. But when we're on the 7 steps back period of our poker results graph, when we're on that 7 or 9 or 12 or 15 or 20 buy-in downswing, there isn't a permanent cause necessarily. There might be an accentuator. It might be that you're playing worse. It might be that you're making rash
Mm-hmm.
decisions. You don't want to fold. You have pot
Mm-hmm.
attachment. It could be things like that. You're not focused. You're trying to force things. Okay. But at the end of the day, you don't lose 20 buy-ins unless you're running bad.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, in quick succession, certainly you can if you're a
Mm-hmm.
loser over the long term. If you lose 20 buy-ins in a few days or a week as a live player or a month, you're running bad. And the brain doesn't want to accept that there isn't an immutable cause for that. So when you show up to your next session and you lose a pot, the brain is just like, well, we know that there's a permanent cause of the losing because there always is.
Mm-hmm.
And it just tells you that so strongly, so subconsciously, that logic is weak. Reasoning is weak.
Mm-hmm.
So when your conscious mind goes, well, actually, no, I know this is just variance, your subconscious goes, ha ha, you have no idea what you're talking about. The subconscious is like a Twitter or YouTube or Twitch troll. They're irrational and they're loud, and you can't really reason
Mm.
with them. You have to get through to them on another level. You have to reach them emotionally to get them to stop.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally get what you're saying, and I don't think that's too dissimilar to the process of making mistakes in a session. The other layer to this is that when you make 4 mistakes in quick succession in a session, that could be variance as well. You're a bit unfocused that day. Maybe 4
Mm-hmm.
spots came up that you're just not that good at. You just haven't studied
Mm-hmm.
those 4 types of spot, and they each
Mm-hmm.
confused you due to weaknesses in your game that you're just yet to treat. But because they came up together, your brain goes, aha, there must be a permanent cause of that, you making blunder after blunder. And it must be that you
Mm-hmm.
suck. It must be that you suck balls and you're useless and you're never going to make it in poker. That's the only explanation, because we know
Mm-hmm.
there's this permanent concrete thing causing this pattern. Only
Mm-hmm.
there isn't. And that's the sort of
Yeah.
eternal problem for the poker player to wrap their head around.
How about though distinguishing between variance and bad play in a session? So like I encountered a situation where, I don't remember all the details in the hand, but I essentially arrived on the river with like the second nuts, and I was in position, villain bet on the river out of position. I raised, and then he jammed. Okay, that's like a very underbluff spot, right? Well, at least it is in live 1-2-2-5.
Yeah, and
It's
it could
very
be that
underbluff.
the second nuts is functioning as a bluff catcher after the third re-raise. So even to call it the second nuts is almost like not really hitting the nail on the head, because if it becomes a
Mhm.
bluff catcher, meaning a hand that
Mhm.
only beats bluffs, what relevance is there to the label second nuts?
Yeah.
This is like being
Yeah.
dragged in too general and too arbitrary a way to
Yeah.
influence our decision, and maybe to appease our subconscious desire to not fold a hand of that overall strength.
Mhm.
Yep.
Right. And I ended up calling, and that's what he had. He had the nuts. So I lost that hand. But I remember thinking to myself for like, a good week or so afterwards, like, what did I do wrong there? And not being able to separate, well, how, was that a mistake in the moment? Was that variance in the moment? And I think the way I approach it is not so much what the result was, but what was my thinking in the moment. So
Yeah.
was I thinking about it correctly? That's kind of what I do, but I'm curious your thoughts on like distinguishing in-game insight, because this can be really hard, because sometimes something can happen in session that's so shocking and so kind of brutal that you don't you in the moment you can't distinguish between like your brain's telling you, maybe your brain's telling you it's a mistake, but you're like, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
I'm not sure exactly how to process that.
Yep. So there's a couple of things here. One is that they're not mutually exclusive, so it can be a mistake and bad variance at the same time. For example, if I put all my money in pre-flop with 9-7 of spades on the cutoff, like I just jam 100 bigs with 9-7 of spades, I'm all in, bet the house, and somebody calls me with jacks in the big blind. That's bad. That's really bad
Yeah.
play. But it's
Yeah.
really unlucky that I ran into a hand that could call that, because 9 times out of 10, nobody calls that. So I was still unlucky to get called. So that's bad variance and it's bad play. And they're very often both present. Like good play and good variance are very often both present. Bad play and bad variance are very often present. And, similarly, good play and bad variance and bad play and good variance are also, they go hand in hand as well. So you really have to accept that there'll be a certain amount of each in play. I think going back to what you're saying, though, about like not knowing whether this was a mistake, whether you should be critiquing yourself, whether you should be chalking it up to variance. There's not a lot of time to do that in the middle of a session, right? Because you're dealt another hand. If you're playing online, you're still in the session. You're dealt more hands. You probably have like an agreed quit time in your head, hopefully. If you play sessions that sprawl on and on for hours and hours and have no end time and no planned designated finish time, that's really bad. You're going to be playing as like a hollow shadow of yourself by the end of that, and you're not going to even realize, because your ability to monitor your play will also depreciate at a similar rate. So you should have an end goal in place for your session. But if that happens, say 15 minutes away from the end of your session, then you can look at the clock and you can say, okay, let me put that in my filing cabinet in my head here, because in 15 minutes time, I'm going to review that hand, or maybe it's like tomorrow. But if you put something in your calendar, your brain forgets about it because it knows you're going to look at your calendar and see what your appointments are, right? That's why we use calendars, so we don't have to store all of this in our memory. So I think if you file it away and your brain knows that you're going to deal with it at some point, it's easier to switch off and get back to the session. But the first thing to say here is that it's really not your job in that moment to decide whether you made a mistake, whether it was variance, whether it's both, and to what extent each one was in play. Trying to figure that out while you're in game can only be a bad thing. It distracts you from the goal at hand. So I'd say here, the best thing to do is to be able to say, that was a losing pot, but it's time to move on. And I'm going to analyze this hand, which I'm curious about later and which I can learn from later. The more curiosity there is, and the less dread and like self-resentment that there is, the better. So if you imagine that your brain only has space to direct energy towards curiosity or dread and resentment and fear, you better make the right choice there, right? Because if you're really curious, it's really hard to also be really anxious and self-loathing. Try next time you're really curious about something to loathe yourself. See how you get on. You probably won't be able to do it, right? And vice versa. If you're self-loathing, it's really hard to become curious about anything. So these are totally mutually opposed. These are mutually exclusive. Curiosity and self-loathing, doubt and dread and that sort of thing. And I think like filing it away, like if, and also like, here's the thing. What version of yourself are you when you're reeling from a big loss? Like when you've just called the second nuts and run into the nuts, what version of yourself are you in the few minutes that follow from that? Are you the optimal, strong, objective version of yourself? Or are you something else?
No, definitely something else. Definitely a kind of shell-shocked version of myself, I would say. Kind of wandering around. You just witnessed a big explosion or something, and you're just kind of like trying to figure out. I'm trying to like not make a allusion to like the pictures of people after like bombs drop, because I think that's just like inappropriate. But that's kind of what I would feel like. Like it's
a minor
kind of like
version of it, maybe. Yeah.
A very minor, a very minor version of that. Yes, but still kind of like a little bit in shock, a little bit numb, a little bit feeling like I've lost the thread here and I need to kind of just reset. I need to get my breath back. I've never been able to lose a really big pot and just like immediately snap back into playing normal again. I can do it, but it takes me a little while.
Yeah, not many people can. Very few people are just fine after losing a really big pot. Okay. So in that case, we could ask, well, what kind of manager delegates the job of analyzing a big pot, an important decision, and how good the decision was and how good the thought process was to that person? What kind of manager makes that delegation? Oh, you look like you've just walked out of a car crash. Why don't you assess how good a job you did there right now? It's like saying to someone that just walked out of a car crash, I want you to tell me exactly what happened, why it happened. Like, we know that witness testimonies from like these big events are wildly inaccurate, right? They're the most inaccurate thing. So your delegation faculty there needs to step in, and yes, you might largely be shell-shocked, but you might have enough composure and willpower to say, okay, what's my job? So like trigger, lost big pot. Reaction, assign job to conscious mind. What is the job? The job is to take some deep breaths, to calm down, to reset. Maybe there's an affirmation you can say to yourself to just like put yourself back on track. You can allow yourself to have negative thoughts. You're probably going to have thoughts like, oh no, was that okay? I regret that. Just let those thoughts come. They're going to come. You're never going to lose a big pot and just be like, cool, man. Yeah, it's all good. Like, you could say that, but that's not really what you're thinking. That's just what's coming out of your
Yeah.
mouth, right? So allow
Yeah.
yourself to have a few thoughts that are venting, reactory thoughts. Allow that. And then there might be an affirmation like, but the grind goes on. Or like,
Mm-hmm.
my job right now is to breathe deeply 3 times and focus. More
Mm-hmm.
buttons need to be clicked. More hands are being
Mm-hmm.
dealt. Whatever you
Mm-hmm.
want to say, your job goes on. You could even have an affirmation such as look at the clock and then say, in 40 minutes' time, I'm going to analyze the fuck out of that hand. I'm going to be super curious. I'm going to really get my teeth into it. And again, curiosity there is the key, not
Yeah.
like dread. Like, in 40 minutes, I'll be able to see if I made a catastrophic blunder and whether I'm worthy as a human. No. In 40 minutes, I get to do some curious exploration work in a solver
Yeah.
with that hand, me in that hand, till I get to the bottom of it and understand it. My job right now is that the grind goes on. So I think
Yeah.
that's the best advice I can give in these situations.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really helpful. I think the problem that I'm always dealing with, and I think a lot of poker players deal with, is that, and we've talked about this on, I think, probably one of my favorite episodes that we've done, which is our episode on fortune reversal, which is, that getting used to, because you can have fortune reversal in the cards, like we talked about. You have, pocket queens and the flop comes out ace king, something like that. That's like a fortune reversal spot in game. But I think you can also have like a kind of fortune reversal feeling of like your own stack,
Yep.
like your own winnings on the day. And this attachment that we naturally feel to our, we've talked about the kind of evolutionary drive we have to protect our own goods, to protect our what we've achieved, what we have, and not to lose it. And so to deal with the swings of a session, of saying you have all of this, all of these gains, now you don't. Now maybe you have gains again, but they're less than what you had before. Now you have more than what you ever had so far. Now you have nothing. And I mean, that's like you're you're laughing for some reason, but
It's just all too familiar. Yeah, it's just very
yeah,
true. It's
yeah,
very vivid. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. And now you have nothing. And so like I played in a live game this weekend. It was a 5-5 game. I'm kind of back taking, I don't know if I'm shot taking or more on a regular 5-5 tip. But anyways, I've been playing this bigger game and it runs super deep, and everyone was really deep. And on my stack in this game just like fluctuated wildly. And I was just on this kind of roller coaster of a day, really, where it was almost unbelievable. And you get out of that kind of environment and you come back to the real world, and it's a very strange kind of portal that you go into, because for me at least, I'm like, I felt like I played well, but there were spots that I was like, oh, I could have done this differently, I could have done that differently, which is normal and natural. But the fact that I came out, that it was a winning session, I think probably colored a lot of it put a lot of the mistakes in more, and I think at a clearer, what I viewed as mistakes in a clearer focus. So like, for instance, if I had come out after that swingy session losing, I think I would have been a little bit more, I would have looked at it more as like, these mistakes were bigger mistakes,
Right.
right? Like these were big mistakes, as opposed to coming out winning. You're like, okay, these mistakes were mistakes, but they were, something I can deal with them, or, I'm more curious about them. So I think it'd be kind of useful to talk about how having the way we end a session can color our impression of the mistakes that we made in that session, or what we view as mistakes, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. So I think what's going on here with a lot of people is that when they come out with a profit, when they've had a winning session, they feel okay. They don't feel vulnerable or threatened. They feel secure. And it might be a kind of temporary, fleeting confidence. It's not the true kind of confidence that we're trying to drive at as poker players. I heard a quote the other day that I really like, which was something to the effect of, real confidence is not just feeling good when outcomes are good, but being able to trust yourself to handle the bad outcomes as well. So knowing that you're going to be okay regardless. And I think when people have fleeting confidence, which is most people don't have true confidence in poker, or they have it to a very small extent. When they come out of a session that's winning, they're being propped up by the good stabilizing emotions, the dopamine. Their brain is in like good rhythm, the sync is right. They're just feeling positive. And when you're feeling positive and unthreatened, it's easy to channel your analysis of your mistakes down that curiosity avenue. And as we've said before, curiosity is much more productive than dread or fear or self-loathing or self-condemnation. So when we feel good, I think we're really able to make more progress with our mistakes than when we feel bad. It's a bit like if you go to a therapist and they're a good therapist, they're probably not going to be like, you idiot, look what you're doing to your life, you moron, you're making all these bad choices, no wonder you're in this mess, no wonder you're here and I'm having to help you. They're not going to do that, because if you're in a frame of mind where you're being attacked, you're not going to be receptive, you're not going to be responsive, you're not going to be curious enough to make any meaningful changes emotionally. There's a thing I heard about, like, when somebody is a compulsive liar or an addict and they're saying, no, I didn't, take heroin, I've been clean for ages, and you think they're lying, and you're like a counselor or a therapist or something, you're not really trained to call them out on it. You're like, therapists aren't trained to say, well, that's not quite true now, is it? Because you shut up yesterday, didn't you? They're trained more to sort of allow the lie to happen and then subtly suggest that, like, maybe this isn't going anywhere, this conversation, and like subtly reroute the conversation or something like that. But from my understanding, that the correct approach psychologically isn't seen to be just calling bullshit on people and putting them into their most threatened, alert, hypersensitive state. So I think losing does that. Losing calls you out. When you lose, the result of the session kind of grabs you and says, are you a good enough player? Are you a good enough person? Have you made too many mistakes here? Are your mistakes horrible? And it puts you away from curiosity and down the path of, like, that really, if we're not careful, overly punitive self-questioning, right? And I think when we're having a losing session, that's why it might be good to give ourselves enough space to actually recover enough to become curious again, instead of just analyzing the session directly after the loss. Because as you say, Melissa, had you come out of that game yesterday, and you will in future, you're going to play that game again and you're going to lose at some point, and you're going to walk out of that game and you're going to be feeling shit, and you're going to get home and you're going to have two choices, and you can go into the lab and start looking at your hands. And when you do that, while you're reeling from the loss, the chances are you're going to search for a permanent cause that might not be there. You're going to try to find a disease and eliminate that disease. And there may not be a disease. It might be a very slight thing you did wrong, but it's going to put some dark kind of tinted spectacles on you, and it's going to make you not see reality too clearly. So the other choice would be do something else, make it the case in your head that at 8 o'clock or when I'm done with dinner or after these chores are done, I'm going to look at those hands, let it stew a little bit, and then just watch your own sense of curiosity. When you think about those hands, how do you feel about them? Are you still like, oh, that takes me to a dark place, I don't like myself when I think about that, I've done badly? Or does it take you to more of a, oh, I wonder if I could blah, 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 because blah, blah, blah. And when we're becoming objective about it and we're just like, I want to explore the thing for what the thing is, and not, I want to explore the thing to find out whether I'm worthy and whether I'm okay, now we're onto the right thing. We need to be scientists. We need to be empiricists. When a scientist is studying something under the microscope, a good scientist is saying, I'm going to get to the bottom of the nature of that thing, whatever it may be. Truth comes first. If there's nothing in the universe and we're just, there's no God and there's just nothing, and our existence is just plainly chance and it doesn't have any greater underlying meaning, then so be it. Science is trying to get to the bottom of that, right? Science is trying to see as far back as we can go and look at the cosmic radioactive microwave background thingy and all of this, and it's doing all of this. Good science is doing that irrespective of what that thing is. Truth comes before nature. And I think when you're reviewing your hands, you want to be in that curious, objective, scientific frame of mind where the truth about the hands comes before their reflection on you or what that means about you or anything like that. Ideally, you review a hand, you find that you did in fact make a mistake, and then you say, aha, how fascinating. I've just grown as a player by finding that mistake. And you only bring it back to you at the very end. It's like, thing, nature of thing, my learning, therefore judgment of self. Not thing's nature, therefore judgment of self. There has to be the learning, growth, curiosity element, not just a consequence or reflection of how badly you did. So check in with yourself before you do that review and find out if you're in a place of objective empirical curiosity or whether you're still in a place of trying to get validation. We talked about this last week when we talked about solvers. Are you trying to get validation from the solver for your play, or are you objectively curious?
Right. I think that's really important, like the idea of like staying objectively curious, because I definitely have hands where I feel objectively curious about. And then I have hands that I use as reminders of my own mental game leaks or internal, issues that I have. So like, I think going back to your example of like the scientist, just looking at investigating nature to find truth. There's also this, what can get in the way is, for instance, like if I call with a bluff catcher or something like that, and I'm shown I'm showing the winning hand and I lose a big pot, right? I don't necessarily like beat myself up. Oh, that was a stupid call. That was dumb. That was, ouch, that hurt kind of thing. I gotta be like that guy's, never bluffing there kind of thing. I'm not doing that. What I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, was my thought process correct? Did I take the steps in my thought process before I pulled the trigger on that call? And if I went through and said, okay, what's my equity? How much is the bet? How much is the pot? How often do I have to be right here? All of these kind of things that that we're training ourselves to think about, and that I think you need to think about to be successful. Did I go through that process, or did I react in the kind of fight or flight mode of saying, big pot, I'm attached to it, I've come this far, now we're on the river, oh, there's more chips, this guy's been super aggressive all day, he's targeting me, he doesn't like me, blah blah blah, he wants to take I call. I'm not saying I do that anymore. I did when I first started, for sure.
Many people do that,
for sure. But those feelings creep up, they're never gone. And the immediate instinct when you're facing, and I'm just using as an example, bluff catching on the river, but there's multiple other spots where these kinds of thoughts can arise, to where you are seized by a kind of animal instinct, and that lizard brain threatens to take over the rational part of your brain. And so fortunately it's unusual for me to be in a spot where that lizard brain wins, right? Or that lizard brain plays out. But as I think we get better, or as I've gotten better, as I've studied more, as I've learned more, as I've progressed, I realize that even when that lizard brain is totally quiet and the rational brain is thinking, there's still errors that can be made in the rational brain. And so when I think about, okay, all of these steps that you go through determining whether something's a profitable call or whether it's a good call, and you arrive at this spot where you're just like, I don't know, but I'm going to call anyways. I don't mind if I'm wrong there. But what I do mind is if I said to myself, okay, well, I'm going to call for other reasons that may not be what I know are the correct reasons. So this happened to me again in this 5-5 game. I got into this spot where I had pocket kings, and I was in the cutoff, I think, under the gun raised, middle position, re-raised, I 4-bet, and it comes back around to middle position, and middle position just jams on me for like her whole stack. And I paused for a second because I'm like, who does this? And it was just like, it was just weird because it was so, she was so deep. And obviously, like, I'm calling, I'm not folding, but I'm like, it was so strange to me. And I thought, okay, let me just like stop for a second and make sure I'm thinking about this rationally. Like, okay, fine, maybe I'm running into aces, but but it's so strange that like this, I just have not really encountered someone shoving with a stack this big. So I did call, and I think she showed like pocket eights or something, and I won the hand. But the guy sitting next to me is like, what were you thinking about? Why did you take so long? And I was just like, I don't know. So that was my answer. But my what I was thinking about later after I left the session, I was driving home, was like, well, what I was thinking about was like, I didn't want the lizard brain to make the call,
Yeah.
even though I had kings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was still like, let me just make sure that like I'm not jumping out into traffic here. Like, let me make sure that like this is, I'm thinking of like that Frogger game,
Mm-hmm.
like you have to like get across the road. Like let me make sure that like, okay, the path ahead of me is like clear, because this is like so odd that she just jammed on me here. Anyways, that's kind of a long-winded circular way of thinking, but
Yeah.
that's,
No, I love it. And it's kind of like onto a
yeah,
new topic, which is like
yeah,
lizard brain infringement. Like, when does mode 2 infiltrate and we don't even realize? Because I think it happens all the time. And I think because we don't really want to admit to that, like, your initial reaction there is just to say, oh, I don't know what I was thinking about, because yes, it does feel like a standard call. You have kings, it's pre-flop, blah, blah, blah.
yeah,
But there was a very deliberate reason that you took your time there. And like, if there's a 10% chance or 5% chance that this is a fold, you better stop
yeah,
and consider whether it is, right?
yeah,
And I love
yeah,
the idea that even though your rational brain was probably always going to call here, it still said, if I call immediately, if I pull the trigger with the shaky hand and the adrenaline flowing through me, I'm actually justifying the whims of the lizard brain. I'm saying, type 2 thinking, subconscious
mm-hmm,
desires, you win. I am just a passenger. You are the driver. We call. I have a really convenient excuse if it goes wrong. I'm going to let you win because you're too powerful right now. And if we lose, I'm going to say we had kings pre-flop, and I'm not going to take any accountability. So the player that calls there with the lizard brain and then wins never realizes that they called with the lizard brain. They never realize
mm-hmm,
that they let the
mm-hmm,
lizard brain pull the strings, that they were actually the puppet. I think this is actually a miraculous feat that you were able to make this decision with the conscious mind.
mm-hmm,
And I love that you
mm-hmm,
stopped and actually thought through it.
mm-hmm,
Most people make decisions with the lizard brain way more than they even realize themselves. There's students that I
mm-hmm,
have and I've had over the years that you show them their play and they're like, I don't know why I did that. And I'm like, can you try and
mm-hmm,
recreate this hand? It only happened 2 days ago. We can see the date of the hand. Can you recreate your thought process to some extent? Give me some insight as to where your brain was at. I'm not judging you. I just want to know. And they're like, I really just can't find any logic why I would call here. Like, it just doesn't seem like a call now. And I'm like, okay, so you didn't use your logical brain then. It wasn't your logical brain calling the shots
mm-hmm.
here. Otherwise, you would be able to recreate the same logic now. They're like, yeah, I guess that's true. I'm like, okay, can you put your finger on a hypothetical, irrational thought or desire that could cause a call like this? And they're like, I know exactly what it is. And you're like, wow. So a minute ago, you had no idea why you made the call, and then as soon as you were prompted by the keywords irrational desire, you instantly
Mm-hmm.
knew what it was.
Mm-hmm.
The conclusion here is that people are
Wow.
blanking out the fact that they're acting on
Yeah.
irrational desires all the time.
Yeah.
But when you prod them in that direction, sort of say, oh, no, there's nothing in that box. Why don't you look in this box? They're like, oh yeah, I see it. It's fucking crazy, right? Because we don't want to take
It,
accountability for that. We're playing a rational game. We're not,
right.
we don't want to identify as someone who just acts on those lizard brain thoughts.
Yeah. And I would say it goes even further, where as a player who's aware of the lizard brain, the how that lizard brain can kind of like dominate so many players' thinking. This comes up a lot in live games all the time, where people do things that are completely irrational, and you know they're irrational
Yep.
because it's obvious, like,
Like the pocket eights
you
jam.
know, like a pocket eights jam, right? Or like you know, betting out like a multi-way, like in multi-way pots, people spew in the weirdest spots and they do the weirdest things. And like I always think to myself, I don't know why people do certain things. Like I try and look at objectively what's happening and make my decision on that, because like I think like a really basic and wrong way to think about poker is like, well, villain is never betting out here with less than like top pair, or villain is never, like, this is a multi-way pot, like why would they do that? And it's like people do crazy stuff all the time and they do irrational stuff all the time. It's like it's like a bunch of people standing in a circle with like loaded guns and like all of a sudden like one of them goes off and it's like, why did that gun go off? Because I don't know, some guy just like lost his shit and fired it in the air.
Especially when the pot is big and the SPR
Yes.
is low, and the person feels like a rabbit in the headlights. They feel under attack and attached to the pot.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like they're just completely in fight or flight because the amount of resources outscales, or doesn't outscale, but it's large enough in relation to the amount that they have, such that they are now diving headfirst over the cliff after those resources, come what may. So when you see a pro do that in that tilted state of mind, they might make a dubious call with a bad bluff catcher and an underbluff line,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But when you see a recreational player do that, because they don't have the normal stabilizing training wheels that the pro has to like keep the bike upright, their mistakes look a lot worse. Like they just jammed a huge amount of money with a medium strength hand on the turn. They made like the biggest polarization error you could ever imagine for no reason. They jammed like second pair no redraw for loads of money.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? Because they were literally up against the wall and they didn't have another recourse, because their brain was screaming at them, get the resources that are in the middle. They're too big compared to the resources that you have. And they didn't have the training wheels, the foundation to say, well, there's no way I'm making a polarization error of that magnitude, because they don't understand that concept well enough. They might figure that out when they're playing their A game, but it's not ingrained enough to protect them in that situation there. But that same weaker player probably won't shove 8 deuce off under the gun for 100 big blinds, because they've at least got enough training wheels in that spot. So the less training wheels you have, strategic sort of, I don't know, seatbelt, the less of a strategic seatbelt you have that keeps you safe from like huge collisions, the more volatile and likely you're going to be to just do absolutely absurd things. So when you get a low SPR and people that have very limited seatbelt protection, who have very limited knowledge of the game, you absolutely get utter random shit. And that's what people mean when they say, well, some percent of the time villain could be spewing here. That's usually right in those situations. When someone says, well, they never bluff, or 10NL players never do anything without at least 2 pair here, or this is under bluff, but they're saying it in low SPR madness spots. I call it low SPR madness for a second. The brain goes loco. It goes into lizard brain mode fully. Yeah, you just can't say that anymore. But what you can say is, if somebody checks all the way to the river in a small pot and then jams for 50 times the pot, they probably have it. Because there's absolutely no reason to fire the loaded gun in that situation. There's no, fight or flight. But as soon as there's pressure and low SBR, yeah, who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah. It is really like getting to like, and I was so guilty of this when I first started playing, and it still creeps up every once in a while. It's just like wanting to be like the table psychologist, like wanting to be the one that's like, oh, because of X, therefore Y, because they did that, therefore this. And people do things for all different types of reasons at the poker table. I mean, I think there is a narrow route of like people do act objectively the same. If there's like a bell curve, it's like there is a middle ground where people are doing, people are for the most part raising when they have big hands pre-flop. For the most part, there are the players that I think are doing things like, I'm going to limp in with aces kind of thing. But for the most part, people are doing, acting objectively the same when you're kind of in the middle of that like bell curve. But on the extremes, people do stuff for all different types of reasons, and you have no idea why they're doing it, and you have no idea if they're going to do it again, and you have no idea, like the idea of like pulling a pattern from something is is kind of ridiculous. I always like compare it to, a person who's acting irrationally, because they're having a mental episode. It's like, you're not going to be like, okay, well, they had a mental breakdown last Tuesday. It's Tuesday a week later, so it's time for their mental breakdown again. It's like, no, it just happens randomly,
Mhm.
and you don't never know what's going to happen, and it's going to be extreme in one case, and it's going to be more subdued in the other. And I think that, I don't know how common this is online, but certainly in live situations, there is this universe of emotion and, you know, um, interpersonal shit going on between people at a table. It's just like this stew of like
Mm.
humanity that you're in. And think people are firing off for all kinds of reasons. People get bored, people are undisciplined, people don't want to, they'd be like, I haven't played a hand in 10 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna raise on the button with 7 deuce or something like that. I'm gonna try and get this bluff through. And so you're constantly in these situations where people are doing things for all different types of reasons. And I think, getting to the point where like you're going to react with a lizard brain to someone else that's reacting with a lizard brain is, yeah, it's just like a recipe for disaster. And I think something that we can, I think, an easily, maybe not easily fixed mistake, but something that we can solve quickly.
Yeah, but I love what you said earlier. I mean, that's all really a great way to
Yeah,
put it. I love the idea of like the human stew that's just like waiting to
yeah,
bubble over like at the slightest thing happening. But back to this lizard brain thing, I think it's like
yeah.
so illuminating, this idea that the lizard brain is always there. Like even when you learn
Oh
how
yeah.
to master it, it's always there. So like if you're like a really good, I don't know, like snake tamer or something like that, the danger of the snake doesn't go away just because you're a good snake tamer. It's just that you're able to negate it and refute it. So snake tamers don't just point their finger at a snake and the snake is like
Hmm.
no longer a threat. It's that they know how to handle themselves around the snake, but they still have to be like on their guard. And there are disasters. Like the one that jumps to mind is like Steve Irwin and the stingray, that whole
Yeah,
horrible thing that
yeah,
happens. So
yeah.
like this stuff does go wrong. And like even for experienced players and professionals and stuff like that, there will be days where their lizard brain just wins a bunch of times when they're just weak. They just don't have the willpower or mental energy to fight it, and they just act on whatever the lizard brain is doing, because that's what happens in ego depletion, right? There's all those studies with the kids that are exposed to like the chocolate but not allowed to eat it for 15
Hmm.
minutes, and then those kids
Hmm.
perform really badly in a test compared to kids that didn't go through that experience. Neither of them had any sugar, so it's not the effect of sugar enhancing performance. It's just that ego depletion from resisting the chocolate was enough to cause tiredness and like poor performance on the test. So if you're having a bad session, if you're getting brutalized, like you're down 3 stacks, the fourth time that that spot comes up where fortune reversal happens and now you really need to find a fold, the chances are you've got no willpower gauge left. Like that thing is
Yeah.
completely empty. And then when you're subconscious, your lizard brain goes, oh, hey, yeah, we're way too in over our heads here, by the way. Like if we fold now, we've lost half of this stack and we're already down 3. So, do you want to put it in? The chances are that the central process is going to go, yep, I don't have any argument. I can't conjure any resistance to that. You win. Let's go. Because at the end of the day, when the conscious mind shuts down, the lizard brain is always there. It's always there. If you wake up in the middle of the night and you don't know what's going on, but there's like a giant spider in your room, you're probably going to run. Like you're still going to know what to
Hmm.
do. The lizard brain's going to kick in. It's always there before the conscious mind is there. And all of this just points us in the direction of we can't possibly take our eye off the ball. We always have
Yeah.
to be aware that the lizard brain is waiting to sabotage us, and we have to manage it. So I would say that everybody could take a leaf out of your book, Melissa, and could actually write down some of the areas where they think their lizard brain wins. Because like a lot of people will be good at defeating the lizard brain or like subduing it or keeping it far away in most spots, but there might be certain situations where that lizard brain just conquers them repeatedly. It just has a
Hmm.
hold on them in that spot. One that comes to mind is suddenly facing aggression you weren't expecting and not being able to
Hmm.
like calibrate in time what's going on, not being able to like adjust your view of your hand. The reason that people struggle to fold good relative hand strength hands in spots where they probably should, because they're facing a line where they just don't beat anything except the bluff and it's under bluffed. The reason that people struggle there against the lizard brain is just basically that the lizard brain is the only thing that makes sense of it. It's just there with a verdict right away. And you have to be like, no, I won't act on that really
Mhm.
strong desire to press the call button because I've got top set. I won't act on it.
Mhm.
I'm at least going to give myself the space to think. So I love what you
Yeah.
did with the Kings. It's like saying, maybe I'll call, but I won't call on your terms.
Yes.
You're not gonna dictate the pace, you bloody
Yeah.
lizard.
Yes, that's so true. That's so true. And it's even funnier that, the player sitting next to me after I showed down kings was like, what took you so long? Like, how could you possibly be this tight? How could you possibly be this nitty that you would even contemplate folding kings pre-flop? And, I'm not going to engage in any kind of, I'm not going to give him like the benefit of engaging in any kind of technical talk or anything like that, or any mental game talk. So that's why I said, I don't know, and just kind of moved on. And also the woman that jammed was like, really, she was really angry. She was like, oh, you're running so hot. and, and so, it was a volatile situation. And so I just kind of just moved on.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I appreciate what you said about that hand, because in the moment I actually did think, well, maybe I am being too nitty. Maybe I am in a game that's too big for me. Maybe I am being I'm not this like freewheeling player that's like so comfortable at these stakes that they're just like, oh, great, like a spot where someone's jamming on me and I have kings, like snap call kind of thing. And that was my initial thought. Like I thought like, okay, maybe he's right. But then when I moved on and like was
Mm-hmm.
driving home later
Mm-hmm.
that night, I'm like, oh, I'm really glad I took that time. So
Yeah, I have some thoughts
um
on this part as well, just before we move on,
okay,
right?
yeah,
That very thing you
yeah,
said there, maybe he's right. Like in the moment, you were like super emotional, right? Like in some way,
yeah,
like it was probably a mix of like a dopamine hit of winning, relief, ecstasy, and then a little bit of like maybe I did take too long, did I act inappropriately there? A little bit of like
yeah,
social shame as well, or something
yeah,
maybe.
yeah,
And
yeah,
you're more susceptible to that self questioning. Like you've been given an opportunity, an invite, if you will, to question yourself from somebody else, right? And that's the same thing that happens to me. Like we'll do Pete versus Troll at the end here. I've got something lined up. But when like I
great.
publish a YouTube video and someone comes on and they're like, this guy is a shit losing player. He pretends to be a poker player, but really he just takes people's money and pretends to know about the game or something like that. Like sometimes I'll get a comment to that effect, right? Rarely, but
Mm-hmm.
it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And normally when I read comments like that, I'm just like, cool, not going to respond to that one. Don't care. But if like I've just burned my finger on the grill, like sometimes I like touch the element. Have you ever done that? You touch like the heat element thing or something.
Sure.
Say I've done
Yeah.
that, right? It's just something that happened to me a couple of weeks ago. And I'm like, fuck. And then like something else goes wrong and I like drop something on the floor. I have to like clean up some glass. I'm like, oh, I'm having a really annoying afternoon. And then I read that. My initial reaction is, well, ego depletion has taken place, right? The burning of the finger and the dropping of the glass have caused ego depletion. And now I'm like, shit, man, I'm maybe I'm worthless. Maybe I'm a scammer. Maybe I've never known what I'm talking about. And that voice is there for a
Mm,
split second, maybe a minute. And it's like, I better check
mm,
the comments and see if anyone else has liked it, or if and it's a really vicious social media rabbit hole. But I'm only susceptible to it if I'm really tired, really upset, or just gone through like physical anguish or something like that. So we have to understand that within our own brains, we give ourselves invites to self persecute as well. So when we lose a pot, that's
yeah.
like the troll coming in or the guy next to you being like, you're too nitty or whatever. We're giving ourselves an invite to beat the shit out of ourselves. Like, hey, Pete, you lost that hand. You're a bit stationary there. Do you want to like give yourself an absolute slogging about that? Do you want to like drag yourself through the blender about that? Because you could. And then it's up to me how I react to that. If I've got enough willpower left and I can like, avoid the tantrum and the meltdown and avoid the 3-year-old child taking over, I can say, later I will look at that hand curiously. This is not the time or
Hmm.
place for me to analyze mistakes right now, but we are going to get to the bottom of that fucker later. We're going to really get it. We're going to like engage with it fully, and we're not going to move on until we figure it out. We can be like really emphatic about that. Or we can crumble. We can be like, yep, I've reached my threshold. I don't have any willpower left. I can't even empty the reserve, or I'm not willing to. I'm going to now destroy myself and say that I'm worthless. And it's so easy to take that
Yeah.
option. So, to summarize that little rant, other people give us invitations to feel bad about ourselves or to treat
Yes.
ourselves badly on a daily basis or weekly basis at least. If you're a content producer, it happens a lot.
I bet.
If you're in the
Yeah.
public eye. But we do that ourselves. Adversity triggers a self-invitation to start doing that to ourselves as well. And
Yeah.
the more aware we become that these invitations are being offered by ourselves and by others, more easily we can decline them and say, I don't have to go down that road. I don't actually have to persecute myself in this way. And
Hmm.
this is silly because I'm the worst at not persecuting myself. Yeah, I can see
I
the
know.
roadmap to help someone else not do it, but it's hard when it comes to yourself.
So to kind of summarize here, do you think it would be correct to say that, okay, like one of the things you constantly hear in like a common saying in business is people say like, it's not personal, like it's just business. Like it's not again, like I'm not mad at you or I'm not whatever. It's just business, right? Do you think we could say about poker, like, don't take it personally, it's just business, or like poker is like an intensely personal game that you should, by the way, not take personally. So like this way of like chastising ourselves, of wanting to turn the blame back on ourselves and move away from that scientific investigation, to move away from that curiosity, is a way of taking it personally. Just like if someone were to say, oh, by the way, like I just bankrupted your company in a hostile takeover, and yeah, like all of those shares that you thought belonged to you and your family now belong to me, and blah blah blah. But don't worry, like I think it's not personal. It's not like I don't like you personally. It's like it's business.
Yeah.
That's an extreme example,
Mm.
but like people that are in partnerships, like they own a business together, and the business goes bad, and they say it's nothing personal, but I'm leaving the partnership.
Mm-hmm.
I still want to be friends with you. Maybe we were friends before. I still want to be friends after, but like I can no longer be your business partner. I'm pulling out of the partnership.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think, maybe a better example where poker is like, okay, you this happened, okay, in the moment you lost or you made an error. Maybe that was like objectively an error that you found out when you went home and investigated it, but it's a scientific process, so it's the truth of the matter is it's an error, and it should not reflect on you
Mm-hmm.
and your worth as a person and your ability to play this game and your ability to be successful at this game.
Yep.
Do you think that's correct
Yeah.
or no?
Yeah. No.
Or maybe it
I
needs to
think
be refined.
like the thing where you say it's not personal, it's business.
Yeah.
Like, that's problematic because it feels really, really personal when you do. So like, leave other people out of it for now, right? When you make a big mistake that costs you a bunch of money and like it sets you back in your progress and you end up going down the landslide when you're trying to climb the mountain,
Yeah.
that feels so personal that to be able to say, oh, that's just business, that's just part of the game, unless you can trace a route to actually accepting that affirmation, just saying it will do very little. Like, you need a way of actually believing it. So I think the danger here is that people say that, don't believe it, think they're treating the problem by just saying it, but because it doesn't resonate with them on a deep level, it doesn't do anything. I think maybe a better way to put it could be, who is going to be the subject of the examination or the observation here? Is it going to be you, or is it going to be the thing that you're trying to get good at? Now, when you become the object, when you become like the thing under the microscope, you can't be improving, because in order to improve, you have to master the external thing, the poker hand, the poker concept. So this goes back to self-dread versus curiosity. The thing under the microscope has to be the technical objective element of the hand. Once you've engaged with that fully, you can go back and say, now, how does that reflect on me? Where can I grow? And what kind of player do I want to become? I want to be someone that grasps that, uses it, and here's my roadmap to doing that. So you do need a relationship with that thing, but you don't want that relationship until you've solved the thing. Until you understand the thing, you want to stay the fuck away from it. You want to be like, okay, I'm going to examine this thing. You want to do it with your hazmat and your suit on and your gloves, and you want to like make sure that you don't take elements of that hand and while examining it, use it to beat yourself up or to persecute yourself or to even inflate your own ego. You should just separate it completely. Get to a place where the hand is the thing under the microscope, and then when something goes wrong and you lose a big pot, You can say, that was a big losing hand which will be examined. That is the subject of the conversation, not me. The fact that you played the hand, that alone does not make you the subject of the situation, but your lizard brain tells you that you are. You're like, well, that happened to me, so I'm the hero, I'm the subject, I'm the protagonist. No, actually the hand is the protagonist. Your job is to analyze it and only then draw it back to you and say how it's going to affect your future growth as a poker player.
Excellent. I think that makes total sense. And that's probably a good place to end it. Did you want to let's do our Pete versus Troll?
Pete versus Troll.
And then maybe my little segment.
Your little segment. Melissa versus annoying, obnoxious, socially inept live player. Love it. There's an acronym in there somewhere. Okay.
Yes.
So
do you want me to go first? Or do you okay, you're bringing it up now. Okay,
I'm gonna bring it up.
Okay.
Yeah, I brought it up on the wrong screen, but I'm gonna bring it up here. So we have a thread here started by somebody called Brew War, very toxically masculine sounding name, like bruh, and then war.
It's
pretty fucking yeah, bruh. You want some war, bruh? Yeah, it's pretty up there, you know, with troll names.
Yeah.
You have played a decent sample now. Open parenthesis. 200k plus hands of Russian cash. Close parenthesis. What has your win rate been so far? There's no more reason to hide it under some low sample excuse. So, let's start with this original comment first. I'm going to express it as a philosophical argument. Premise 1. You have played 200k plus hands of Russian cash on GG Poker. This is the bankroll challenge that I've started, by the way, on GG Poker, right? That I reference and draw hands from in YouTube videos. That's premise 1, that I've played 200,000 or more hands. Premise 2, there is no reason to hide the results of a sample that extensive. Premise 3, Pete is hiding the results of a sample that extensive. Premise, a conclusion, therefore something is not right here. Pete's a losing player, doesn't want to admit it, that sort of thing. I think that's the argument. Would you agree that that's a decent formulation of this argument?
I think so.
Now, in philosophy, we're trained to come to understand that an argument can be sound, or it can be valid, or it can be unsound or invalid. So a sound argument is one where the premises are true and the conclusion logically follows from the premises, right? So if I say, for example, dogs are animals. Smudge is a dog, therefore Smudge is an animal. That's that's sound and it's valid, right? So the premises are true and they follow from the conclusion follows from them. Now, here, the problem with this argument is that the first premise is completely false and made up. I've only played 18,000 hands of Russian cash. And I'm currently winning at about 5 BB per 100, but 18k doesn't mean anything, and I'm not going to share a graph of 18k hands. I don't know what my true win rate is in this game. I've not even really got down to grinding it. I've just played it a little bit. If I had 200k, I think I would share it. But that's the main problem. You can't just make shit up. You can't just make up facts, and then form a whole argument on it and hope nobody questions the premise that you made up. Brew War. This is bad.
Well, it's weird. It's weird that he would come into it with a totally made up fact. That's so odd. It's just so strange. And saying it with such authority, you've played this amount of hands and that's false. And then it's really weird. It's very, very bizarre.
It's so bizarre. And to play 200k hands since I started the bankroll challenge, I'd had to be grinding full time in that game. It's only been a few months I've been doing. I'd actually have to have played 85k hands a month, which would leave no time to run my business or coach anybody or do anything. It's a really weird supposition. But anyway, then the thread goes on. Probably minus 5 BB per 100, laughing face. Then lots of people come to my defense. If you believe he's a losing player, you have to be crazy. Since I watched Cash Injection in grade 1 of the academy, I've crushed in 3 different sites. So there's people coming in and being like, this guy is clearly good. It's funny because pros hire me. Like people that play high stakes hire me for coaching sometimes, and they're like, I know that you don't play, and it's fine because I don't necessarily need my coach to be actively grinding. But a
Hmm.
lot of people, they just can't accept that someone could be a full-time professional poker instructor. They have a very hard time accepting
Yeah.
that, while also like not requiring that person to be a full-time grinder. But you can't be both. You can't
Right.
actually be both because you don't have two lives or two selves. You can't clone
Right.
yourself.
Right. Well, I think you have a business model that is, your business model, and it's not even necessarily your brand, but it's just like your business model, which you're very upfront about. And that business model is going to invite certain reactions from the public.
Totally.
Some people are going to get it and some people aren't. And I know that you know that, but I can imagine it's very difficult to be faced with it, especially in a way that is, obviously so public facing. Um, and that's, I think it sucks and I think it's hard. And I give you a lot of credit for dealing with it, but I think you're going to probably have to deal with it for the rest of your
Yep.
career
Well, unless
till the,
I
till
do
the end
make
of
the time to
time.
play a big sample and then post the results, which might happen
But
at some
here's,
point,
but
but it'll
here's
take a
like,
while.
but like, what if this happens? What if you get that big sample, post the results, and nothing changes, and people say something like, like, I don't know, have another criticism
Yeah, I
about the
mean, they
results
will.
that you posted,
Yeah.
and so, and I know that that, and this is nothing new, but yeah, I mean, I think like everyone has to pay like a certain tax in life. That's not the tax that not a financial tax,
Mm.
but it's just like it's an EV tax in a sense where it's like you just have to deal with shit.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm okay
And
with it.
shit
I'm
people.
honestly like
I know you're okay
generally
with it.
okay. Yeah.
I know you are. Yeah.
Mm.
I'm not trying to suggest you aren't, but and the reason I bring this up is because when I talk about these annoying live players, I think about it as like this is just part of the job
Mhm.
and part of the tax that you have to pay to
Yep.
sit at a table with people who are going to shove their stack with pocket eights, right?
Yep.
And a 5-bet with pocket eights. And the reality is like you just have to deal with that. And I try and remind myself of that. I remind myself of that when I see fish raking in enormous pots for making absolutely ridiculous plays. When I'm having a bad session, I remind myself of that when I see someone who's like absolutely obnoxious, playing incredibly recklessly, winning, a shit ton, making like really disgusting comments about women and sex and all this kind of stuff at the table.
Mm.
you know you just have to deal with it. And honestly, like that's, I don't know, that, I mean, it's different than what you're dealing with, I think, but for me that's how I
I think it's
process
kind of
it. And
similar. Like
maybe it's a similar,
you're
yeah.
getting it you're having to deal with like really like low kind of disgusting disrespectful behavior that isn't okay and isn't tolerated in most social situations, but the places it is tolerated, sadly, poker tables, this seems to be tolerated a lot more than it would be in some other settings. And
Yeah.
also YouTube comments, Twitter, the
Yeah.
internet in
Yeah.
general, things are tolerated that would never be fucking tolerated face to face. You know, if someone like that, if someone spoke to you like that face to face, like if I was sat at the casino and someone came up to me and was like, bro, you've played this much. What's your win rate been? Why are you hiding your win rate, mate? And was like this in a casino. I'd be like the whole table would be like, this guy's an asshole, and he would get
Yeah.
told to
Yeah.
leave, and people would let him know that, right? Like people would stand up on your behalf, and you would stand up for yourself, and you would maybe get in a fight, and like it would be a really emotive situation where you'd be charged with adrenaline. You'd want to fucking knock the guy out, right? And you'd have to show restraint not to like actually go for him in that case, right? Because that's your initial reaction there. At least it would be mine. But online, it's just like, it's so different. And like at a poker table as well, for some reason, like this kind of behavior is just, I wouldn't even say it's tolerated. It's just kind of ignored, right? Like people just don't
Yeah.
really take a stand at a poker game. It's just a special kind of place. I don't know. It's a weird one, but you're right. It's a similar thing. There's a tax. I think part of it as well is that you and I in our daily life, we probably don't associate with anybody that
No.
makes up random facts and then has a go at you about them, who is misogynistic and disrespectful and crude in that way, we probably don't associate with anyone like that. We've chosen to avoid people like that in our lives. And because of that, when we do encounter it, we're like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. Like, I've not chosen to, like, be spoken to like that. I don't associate with people like that. And I think that's why the internet's such a challenge, because you have to accept that when you're a public figure on the internet, you put something out there, you actually have to deal with everybody that sees that, and you haven't chosen who sees that and who doesn't. And you will get people seeing that who will just be really disrespectful and will speak to you in a way that none of the people you've allowed into your life ever would. And that's the thing you have to get to grips with. Right, let's quickly do your segment, Melissa versus Annoying Live, disrespectful, moronic, imbecile, and then we'll wrap up.
I will quickly do this. I actually teased this just now, but yeah, this was a player who is in one of the local card rooms in the city where I play, and I've seen him a bunch of times, and he's really loud, really obnoxious, makes all kinds of gross comments. But the thing he does that really annoys me so much is that he's an absolute whale, and therefore I have to sit there and play. I have to play with him because he just absolutely donates all the time. He's in every hand. And then the other thing, because he's in every hand, he's constantly getting into these stupid spots where, like, on the river, someone will bet out and he takes so long to fold, and he constantly does this thing where he looks at his cards, looks at the player, looks at his cards, leans over the table, tries to get some kind of read. What do you have? What are you doing? Are you bluffing me? Blah, blah, blah. So every hand with him at the table takes 20 minutes just to get through.
Yeah.
And, I didn't like call him out on this, but I did say, like, we were in a spot where I had raised him on the river and he started doing it. And I said to him, I just said, why does every hand with you take 40 minutes? And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, every hand with you takes 40 minutes. And it wasn't even like, I wasn't trying to do it to get him to call or fold. I just literally wanted life to move on, because, like, it's such, like, you're just at this, like, you're just like this collision of stupidity that you just have to sit there and wait for. But the conclusion of this story is that he was in that big 5-5 game. He had an enormous stack in front of him. He lost it all in one hand where he called queens, and it was there was a flush on the turn. He called queens. The player had a flush. He lost his entire stack, a lot of chips, to this guy across the table the two of them didn't like each other. I watched this happen right in front of me. And I looked over at the guy, and he was staring straight ahead, and he had tears in his eyes. And I thought, wow, a moment of humanity. It's like he was literally, like, there was tears welling up in his eyes. And then I saw him get up, and he went and he stood in the corner, and he was just, like, putting his hands over his head, and he was, like, clearly upset and everything. So it was a very interesting situation.
Yeah, I mean, like, the people that act like this are often just the most internally vulnerable, though, right? Like, in order to be lashing out all the time at people, that must be an absolute shit show living within that person's body and mind. Like, it really must. Yeah, these are humans. They're just like, man, it's just like, what have you gone through in life? Like, what patterns has your life, like, produced that have made this the outcome, that have made this, like, the final result? But anyway,
I just think there's a lot of dysfunctional people out there, and we don't realize that because we just don't associate with them, and we live in a bubble of our own making, which we have to do for our own sanity. But poker, these dysfunctional people end up at poker tables because a lot of times it's the only places where they're welcome. They don't necessarily have any friends that they go hang out with.
Right.
And so yeah.
Okay, let's wrap it up. I've got a meeting because I'd love to talk about this more, but that was really enjoyed today's episode. I thought it went in a really cool direction. I'll think of an appropriate title. And yeah, guys, don't forget to rate us on Spotify, share this podcast with your friends, on Twitter, with everybody you know in the community. That's really all I've got to say. Anything else you want to add this week, Melissa?
Nope. I'll just, second what Pete said. Thanks everyone for listening. We really appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you back here for season 2, episode 3 next week. Bye, guys.